I want to start today's episode with a number. And it's a number that completely stopped me in my tracks when I read the research. And that was 61%. That's the percentage of workers who are currently languishing, not thriving, not engaged, not bringing their best selves into work, just getting through the day. This is from the University of Illinois' 2026 Workplace Wellbeing Report. More than half the people in US workplaces right now are languishing. And if you're thinking, well, that's okay, that's America, it's across the globe. So let's take a close look at UK. So Gallup's 2026 State of the Global Workplace Report said only 10% of UK employees are fully engaged at work. Only 29% say they are thriving and 46% reported in feeling stress the previous day. And when we look at it from a global perspective, global employee engagement has now fallen to 20%. And this is the first time ever that Gallup has recorded 2 consecutive years in decline. 80% of workers worldwide are either disengaged or actively disengaged. And the Gallup are putting this down to $10 trillion of loss in productivity across the globe. This isn't a company issue. It isn't a country problem. But in my opinion, it 100% is a leadership issue. And it is happening everywhere. Hi, welcome to Decoding Confidence. I'm your host, Advita Patel, a confidence and influence coach. And over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to be digging into what confidence actually looks like in the workplace. Not the fake it till you make it stuff, but the real deal. So whether you're navigating tricky stakeholder conversations, trying to get your voice heard in the boardroom, or you're just trying to figure out how to back yourself when the imposter syndrome kicks in, this is your space. I'll be talking to people who've been there, sharing practical tools you can actually use, and unpacking the myths that keep us second guessing ourselves. Enjoy this episode. So in today's episode, I want to talk about why so many people are languishing and are disengaged, and most importantly, what the research tells us what will actually help. Because it's not going to be Pizza Fridays, it's not a wellness app, it's not letting people go home early every other week or whatever. It's something much more fundamental. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you will know it goes right back to what I talk about and what I love talking about, confidence, specifically what it means in the workplace and how confident people actually show up as their best selves and help other people do that. But first of all, let's make sure that we are all on the same page when I talk about the word languishing. Languishing describes a state that sits between burnout and thriving. So you're not falling apart, you're not off sick, you're just existing. And I think what makes it very tricky for leaders is that it can almost be invisible. Someone who's languishing often looks fine from the outside. They're attending meetings, they're hitting their deadlines, they are quietly cracking on, but they have checked out from caring. And that's a real important distinction to me, because you can still be present and still be completely disengaged from your work. And I really want you to think about this and think about what it looks like from a day-to-day perspective in your organization. Have you noticed the person who used to share ideas in meetings but now just quietly nods along? Or someone who used to push back but no longer does because they've decided it doesn't really matter? Or even someone who used to ask questions and now just waits to be told what to do. This could be you, this could be people around you, but that is what languishing is in action. You're showing up, but there's this flatness to everything and a lack of motivation to deliver your work. And it's a feeling of going through the motions. And I think the reason the University of Illinois found this so significant is because we're talking about 61% of the workforce. That isn't like a niche problem. And it's not something that you can just paper over with a team away day or a new set of company values on the wall or a social event. What we really need to think about is what's causing it. And there are a few things, and the research points to some of these kind of familiar culprits that you will know of. one of which is what I call the listening to action gap. Research shows that only 1 in 10 employees believe their feedback will actually lead to any type of change. Just think about that for a second. There are people, and you're probably one of them, that's been asked for your opinion, you've filled in a survey, you're sitting in a town hall, you've contributed questions, but then nothing happens. And when you don't feel heard over time, you're of course going to stop trying. You disengage and you languish. And the thing is, when that happens and that gap is there, it's not always because your leader doesn't care. It is sometimes because leaders may hear the feedback and they think about the feedback and they may even do a little bit of action around it, but they never really close the loop. They never say, you told us X and here's what we're going to do about it. So from an employee's perspective, nothing changes. And that's why I'm a big fan of the whole communication and closing the loop and making sure that actions are delivered. There's also a question of whether people feel safe at work. And I don't mean physically safe, though that is important, of course it is. But I'm talking about psychological safety, that opportunity to speak up safely, to ask a question, to disagree, to say things like, I don't know, or I made a mistake. This is where it gets quite interesting for people who lead, because psychological safety is increasingly being called the leadership skill of 2026. Now, psychological safety has been a bit of a buzzword for a while. And I think sometimes when things become a buzzword, we just start to glaze over it. But so let me try and make this a little bit more concrete for you. Psychological safety in the workplace is essentially being able to be honest without fearing that it's going to cost you. It's about being able to raise a concern in a meeting without someone rolling their eyes or tutting under their breath. It's about admitting that you're struggling without it being used against you. And it's also about challenging a decision respectfully without being labeled as being difficult. And I want to take a little bit of time on this because I think that there's a lot of well-intentioned workplaces that fall down when it comes to psychological safety. They create environments where they say we want people to be able to speak up and have the confidence to do that. But people don't often have that as an equal right. Leadership are sometimes thinking, well, I can speak up, so they should be able to speak up. But if you are a new person or someone from a different background or somebody who has already had the ideas dismissed and not told why those ideas were not going to be used, they're doing a very different type of calculation every time they open their mouth, every single time. And the data on what happens when psychological safety is present is pretty compelling. Research, I'm going to put all this in the show notes, shows that workplaces with higher levels of psychological safety generally see a 19% boost in productivity and also an increase in innovation. And for underrepresented groups, and I'm talking about women, people of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ+, lower socioeconomic backgrounds, the retention is even more dramatic. Retention increases 4 to 6 times. 4 to 6 times. So I'm not talking about a nice to have here. I'm not. I'm talking about a direct business outcome. And yet there are so many leaders who file this under soft stuff. And I'm going to push back on that really hard. And I often do when I work with organizations. There's absolutely nothing soft about your retention rate or the innovation or your pipeline. The other thing that is worth saying on this episode, because I often have this debate with many leaders, is that psychological safety isn't about creating a space where there's no conflict or no challenge. It's actually the opposite. When people feel safe, when they're more willing to have these conversations, to disagree, and they say things like, I think we're getting this wrong, they are going to help you avoid crisis and catastrophic results because they're willing to put their neck on the line to make sure they're doing the best for the organization. So bringing it back to what we're talking about on this show, languishing and the lack of psychological safety are both at their core, I truly believe, a confidence problem. When someone is languishing, they have often lost their confidence in the workplace, in their leadership, and in the idea that things can be different. When psychological safety is absent, people don't feel confident enough to contribute fully. And the other thing I want to talk about quickly, and it's a conversation I have with many leaders actually, they believe that sometimes when you have psychological safety, it means that there's no space for conflict or challenge. It's actually the opposite. When people feel safe, they are more willing to have the hard conversations. They are more willing to disagree and say things like, I think we've got this wrong. That isn't a comfortable conversation to have with many, but it's a very healthy conversation to have if you want to build a type of culture where people can be their best selves and deliver against the objectives that you have set. If you're expecting people to nod along and not disagree and have groupthink, I can guarantee you are heading into catastrophic disasters and crises. These are subject matter experts. These are talented people that you have employed to support you in that organization to deliver against your strategy and your objectives. If they don't feel that they can contribute and they can't add value, then they are going to step back and not bother. In my book, Decoding Confidence, I speak about how confidence isn't an individual thing. It's not about whether you personally feel bold enough to speak up. It's about the environment that you're in, the culture around you, the signals that leaders are sending you every single day on what's okay and what isn't okay. You can do all of this inner work. You can build your self-belief. You can practice your voice in speaking up. You can show up ready to contribute. And then when you walk into that room and none of that is welcome and the culture isn't set up to receive that, that environment will win every single time, regardless of how confident you feel. And that's why this conversation isn't just about individual confidence. It's about what leaders and the people around you build to help you show up as your best self. You can't make someone feel confident themselves, but you can absolutely create conditions where confidence is more likely to grow. And this is where people don't always get it or don't want to hear it, because your behavior and the way you create the environment can destroy someone's confidence overnight. Okay, I want to be a bit upfront with you here and direct. I'm not going to give you like a checklist of things that you need to do, because partly I think real human change is never that simple, and partly because I think every single culture and environment is different. But I am going to share with you some prompts that I want you to really think about over the next week or so. There are four prompts that I want you to really think about, whether from a personal leadership point of view or an organizational point of view as well. First point is, where are you making it safe not to know? And what I mean about this is that one of the fastest ways to erode psychological safety is to be the kind of person who always has to have the right answer, who fills every silence and is consciously or unconsciously signaling that uncertainty is a weakness. So when was the last time you said, I don't know, let's figure out together, in front of your peers or your team? And if you're struggling to kind of remember when you last said that, then that's something worth noting. The second point is, what's your feedback to action ratio? As I said at the start of this podcast episode, only 1 in 10 employees feel that their feedback leads to some sort of change. That is a massive trust deficit. If you're asking people for input through surveys, in meetings, in one-to-ones, in town halls, what are you actually doing with it? And most importantly, do people know what you are doing with it or did with it? Closing the loop isn't only about good manners and respecting other people's feedback, but it also signals confidence in them to say what you said mattered. And if that feedback that they shared led to a decision that you can't share or a change that isn't possible right now, then say that. Say, we heard this from you, and here's why we are not taking action on it yet. It is so much better than silence, because silence gets interpreted as dismissal every single time. Third point is, who gets to feel psychologically safe on your team and who doesn't? This is probably one of the most uncomfortable questions for many people to think about, because psychological safety isn't always distributed equally. Research consistently shows that underrepresented groups, people from different backgrounds, from different characteristics, people with diverse thinking, people with disabilities, women, LGBTQ+, often experience less psychological safety, even in teams that consider themselves inclusive. Are there patterns in who speaks up and who stays quiet? Who gets their ideas built into in meetings and who gets talked over? These patterns will show you the data and insight. They are telling you something about whose confidence your culture is supporting and whose it isn't. So it's worth getting curious about the type of voices that are getting heard and the patterns about who gets to speak up and who doesn't. And the final point is, how are you showing up? Research again shows that managers influence around 70% of employee engagement. 70%. Which means if you're stressed, if you're burnt out, or if you're going through something yourself, then that's going to filter down to your team. And I'm not saying that you have to be relentlessly positive. Toxic positivity is not great. But it's important that you demonstrate an element of vulnerability here so you can share with them about what's working well, what isn't working well, and being self-aware enough to be able to share that with them. So when they walk into a room or they open a Slack message or they join a call, they know what to expect. And it's not that Jekyll and Hyde characteristic that can sometimes knock people's confidence or make them feel like they are not feeling safe. And we all have a role to play in that, by the way, not only if you're a leader, but also if you're a peer. I also want you to check out your power dynamic. So who holds the power in the decisions that are being made in the workplace? That will determine on who needs to adjust and adapt slightly based on what is going on in the workplace. So whether you're based in the US, whether you're based in the UK, Europe, Asia, wherever, employee disengagement, languishing is a global problem. People at work are not okay. They are disengaged, they are stressed, and they have too many things that are going on that has quietly stopped them believing in themselves and believing that things can be different. Psychological safety is probably one of the most powerful levers that we have that we can use to change that environment. Both a languishing and safety deficit are fundamentally, in my opinion, issues down with confidence. It's not about that loud, performative kind of confidence. It's that quiet trust that you know that you can be safe enough to fail, safe enough to challenge, safe enough to be able to know that your ideas are going to be heard. That kind of confidence doesn't come from a workshop or even a policy. It comes from consistent, intentional leadership behaviours, from habits that have been built and the signals that are sent every single day in that organisation. And I know all of what I just shared today can feel probably a little bit overwhelming, especially when you're already stretched. And we're in tough times at the moment. I'm not saying we're not. So take each day as it comes. You don't have to overhaul absolutely everything. Just start noticing about who's quiet. When does teams stop pushing back? When do people stop speaking up? Whether your words and actions are creating that safety around people, or are you eroding it? That's where change can begin. And this is one of the reasons why I'll never stop talking about confidence in confident workplaces, because I genuinely believe that when leaders get this right, everything else follows. So if today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me a message, share it with someone in your network who needs to hear this, or just leave a review for me. I would be so happy, and it genuinely helps more than you'll ever know. And if you're new here, then please go back and check out the earlier episodes where I break down the Believe framework from the book and where I've unpacked every habit and how it shows up in real leadership. There is a lot to dig into, and if you want to dig in even deeper, you can purchase a copy of my book either directly through my website if you want it personalized, or through any of the online retailers such as Waterstones, bookshop.org, TJ Hughes, Barnes and Nobles, and of course the mighty beast out there, Amazon, if that is where you purchase your books from. Take care of yourself, and I will see you next time.